Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. And you may have heard Nehemiah talked about before, and it's usually talked about in a sense of determination, in a sense of doing whatever it takes to get the job done, those type of things. But as I was reading through this, through the book of Nehemiah this week, it hit me as something radically different. It hit me as something really that kind of went where we were going with this love all, serve all mentality. And so I want to just dive into that for a few moments. Nehemiah chapter 1, and just to kind of get you set up for where we're headed, I'm going to go ahead and read the whole first chapter. It's only 11 verses, and if I can stumble through all the names in it, we'll get through it rather quickly. These are the memoirs of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. Aren't you glad your name's not Hakaliah? My sinuses are too bad to be called Hakaliah. In late autumn of the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was at the fortress of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. And I asked them about the Jews who had survived the captivity and about how things were going in Jerusalem. And they said to me, things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been burned. Now listen to Nehemiah's reaction. When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said, "O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of unfailing love with those who love him and obey his commands, listen to my prayer. Look down and see me praying night and day for your people Israel. I confess that we have sinned against you. Yes, even my own family and I have sinned. We have sinned terribly by not obeying the commands, laws, and regulations that you gave us through your servant Moses. Please remember what you told your servant Moses. If you sin, I will scatter you among the nations. But," this is a big but in the Bible, "but if you return to me and obey my commands, even if you are exiled to the ends of the earth, I will bring you back to the place I have chosen for my name to be honored. We are your servants, the people you rescued by your great power and might. O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those of us who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success now as I go to ask the king for a great favor. Put it into his heart to be kind to me." And he ends with a statement, "In those days, I was the king's cupbearer." Nehemiah was a Jew, and he found himself in a position, to be honest with you, that was pretty much a position of comfort. Nehemiah kind of had it good. See, Nehemiah lived in the palace with the king. He was the king's cupbearer. Now, there was a tad bit of danger to this job because the cupbearer actually tasted the wine before the king had it. So to be sure that he didn't fall dead. If Nehemiah took a drink and then fell dead, the king says, I'll have another year, something different. Go to the wine cellar, get me something else. So Nehemiah's job did have a hint of danger to it, but because Nehemiah had been there so long, I mean, apparently it wasn't that dangerous of the job. There wasn't a huge threat on the king because Nehemiah had been the cupbearer for a while. And it was a pretty easy gig. He carried the cup to the king, he took a drink, he handed it to the king. He got to drink the best wine. He lived in the palace. He had some authority. Things were relatively comfortable for Nehemiah. Everything was good. Until one day he got a visit from some people. And he asked them how things were going in Jerusalem. Why? Well, that's where his family was from. That's where his friends were. That's where his heritage was. He had connections to Jerusalem. Being a Jew, that's where he had came from. And so he had connections with them. His friends, his loved ones were were part of that. And so he asked how things were going. And they said things are not going well. So he found out some bad news. Things weren't going well for them. And instantly, Nehemiah had compassion for them. And as I read through that a few times, I kind of put myself in Nehemiah's shoes. And as I was sitting with my friends and I asked them, how are things going? And they said, oh, it's not going well. You know, we're in great trouble, and the wall of Jerusalem's been torn down, and the gates have been burned. And Nehemiah said, when I heard this, and then he says what he did. And I thought, what would have happened when I heard this? When I heard that, what would I have done? If I'm in the same boat and I ask my friends who come to visit me, how are things going back home? How's it looking? How are things going? How's everybody doing? And they said, oh, it's just not going well. What would I have done at that moment? And I was kind of shocked at my answer. Because I knew what I would have said. I would have said the same thing I always say when somebody tells me something's not good. I'll be praying for you. Right? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying for you about that. I'll remember you in prayers. Oh, I wish I hadn't heard that. That's terrible. And I probably would have finished my visit, and they would have went on their way. I would have prayed. I mean, I generally, when I say I'm going to pray, I pray. I really would have prayed. And then I would have taken the king his wine, and my life would have went on as normal. And so I want to ask you to do something. Put yourself in that same situation. The last time somebody said to you, oh, things aren't going well, what was your reply? What did you do? What action did you take? Something different happened in Nehemiah. Nehemiah sat down and wept. He cried. I'm not a big crier normally. There's some things that make me cry. My daughter, not because of things she does, just because when I talk about her, sometimes I get emotional. My family, sometimes I get emotional about that. If I watch Rudy, I cry like a baby every time. If you haven't watched Rudy, watch it and tell me you cried. There are some things that make me cry, but just by the nature of my job and the things that I get to hear a lot of times, I find myself to be a very compassionate person, but when somebody tells me that things aren't going well, it's not normally my first inclination to sit down and weep bitterly. For one, they would think I was crazy, and for two, it's just not normally what I do, but that's what Nehemiah did. It says that when he heard it, he sat down and wept. It didn't say that when they left that he sat down and wept. It said that when he heard it, he sat down and he wept. I don't know if he ever told him goodbye, see you later, or what, but it just says for days he mourned what he had heard. See, it didn't just, it wasn't one of those, okay, I'll pray for you things, but when they told Nehemiah that they were in trouble, Nehemiah hurt for them. He hurt with them and for them, so much so that he sat down and he wept and he mourned for days. It affected his life so much that even the Bible says in the next chapter, we'll just go there together. In chapter 2, verse 1, it says, early the following spring, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine, and I had never appeared sad in his presence before this time. And so the king asked me, why are you so sad? You aren't sick, are you? You look like a man with deep troubles. with deep troubles. Do you realize that Nehemiah had no troubles? He was still the king's cupbearer. He still lived in the palace. Everything that was happening in Jerusalem had no physical effect on him. It was not going to change his day-to-day life, but something was happening inside of him that he could not explain, that he couldn't get rid of. Something happened inside of him that changed him. And it affected him so much that the king noticed. The king noticed. And his compassion moved him to action. True compassion moves us to do something. There is always something that can be done. The statement that I hate the worst is, well, there's just nothing we can do about it. I hate that statement because I'm a fixer. I fix things. It's what I do, right? There's a lot of you in here. You're fixers. You hear about something, you want to fix it. You don't want to whine about it. You don't want to cry about it. You want to get it fixed. And what they had told Nehemiah was that the whole town was in ruins. The walls had been taken apart, had been blown apart, they had been burned. Everything was demolished. There quite literally was nothing that could be done about it. Unless somebody was willing to do something about it. Unless somebody was willing to do something. And Nehemiah found himself willing. And he put himself in a position with the king where he asked the king if he could go and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. If he could rebuild its walls. And I'm not going to take you through all of that. You can go back and read Nehemiah. It's a pretty short book in the Bible, just a few chapters in there. And so he goes and he gets letters from the king, and the king says, yes, you can go. And he gives him letters so that he can go through safely. He sends guards with him and everything. He gives him a letter to give to the person who is the keeper of the forest. And so he can get all the timber that he wants to rebuild the gates of the wall. And so he begins his trip and begins his journey to take action. Genuine compassion moves us to action. If we jump over to Nehemiah 4, we find something that happened as he had gotten there and he had started building the wall and making plans. In chapter 4, verse 1, it says, Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. And he flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, what does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they are doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a day if they offer enough sacrifices? Look at these charred stones they are pulling out of the rubbish and using again. True compassion leads us to action, and true compassion will almost always be met with ridicule and resistance. When you begin to have compassion on somebody, it will always be met with resistance, sometimes by them, sometimes by others in the situation. They will tell you why that person is not worthy of compassion. They will tell you why it can't be done, why there is nothing that can be done. That's just the way that person is. They are never going to find themselves in a good place because they're just not built that way. There's nothing that you can do for them. They've went too far. They've done too much. They've messed things up themselves. They're just not able to be helped. That's what Sanballat was saying here. It was too far gone. They didn't want Jerusalem to be strong again. And I want to look at just the last sentence there. It says, look at those charred stones they are pulling out of the rubbish and using again. Now, Sanballat there was talking about actual charred stones from the wall. The wall that was the defense around Jerusalem. When Jerusalem had been captured and exiled, they had torn down the walls. And these were physical, literal stones that the fire had gotten so hot on the gates and on the buildings and everything that it had charred the stones. And so there were just burnt rocks laying around. And they said, look at those charred rocks that they're pulling out and reusing. And when I read that, it just hit me hard. Because sometimes our lives, we build up defenses and we build up things to protect us, and we use God for that. God protects us, and we just build up these defenses in our lives, and then we get these things that protect us from any harm coming to us. But then sometimes somebody gets in past all that stuff. Sometimes something happens that just happens to just tear a hole in our wall, in our defenses. And before we know it, everything's up in smoke and our walls are down and they're all charred, and it looks like nothing can be done to help us. And we feel like we are so broken, like we are so torn, like we are so charred that nothing in us is usable again. From the outside looking in, that's what Jerusalem looked like. And from the outside looking in, your life may look that way, or the life of somebody around you may look that way. It's so broken and torn apart and charred and burned that it will never be useful to anybody again. Those stones had stayed there, laying on the ground, charred for years. It looked that way for a long time. Until somebody was able to look at that and not see what it was right now, but see what it could be in the future. What it used to be in the past and what it could be once again if somebody was just willing to work on that wall. You may look at the lives of other people and you may see them as hopeless. You may see them as somebody that will never be what they're supposed to be. Or you could be like Nehemiah and you could look at the heap of charred stones in their lives, the heap of charred whatever it is, hurts, of disappointments, financial struggles, relationships lost, whatever it is that's laying even almost smoldering, just charred beyond recognition. You may be like Nehemiah and be able to look at those people and say, you know what? I think if we jumped on board, we could help rebuild that person. We could help rebuild them. Nehemiah 6, verses 1 through 4 says, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, the Arabs, sent the rest of our enemies, found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall, and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet hung the doors and gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. Sorry. I feel like I live my life in the plain of Ono. Right? You ever felt like you've been there? Like, oh no, we're here. That one was free. That wasn't in the plans. In the plain of Ono. But I realized they were planning to harm me, so I replied by sending this message to them. I want you to listen to what Nehemiah says. He says, I am doing a great work and I cannot stop to come and meet with you. And 4 times they sent the same message, and each time I gave them the same reply. I'm doing a great work. I'm doing a great work. And I'm not stopping now. Our love for others must be persistent. We've got to have compassion. It's got to move us to action. And then we have to be persistent. You may say, John, I can't follow you. You're talking about building a wall, and then you're talking about helping people, and I'm not making the jump with you. Well, let me try to sum it up for you here. At one point in my life, I was broken. At one point in my life, I had went so far that I never thought I could be rebuilt. At one point in my life, if you would have asked me if I could do what God has me doing right now, I would have called you an idiot. But it was at that time that some people saw something in me. And they didn't see me as the charred mess that I had made my life into. They saw me as what I was supposed to be and what I could be. If only they would stack those things back together. If they would just begin to work with me. If they would just begin to show me how to rebuild that wall. If they would just climb on that wall and help me along and help me put it back together. They saw a vision that I was supposed to be so much more than where I had put myself. And it was because of their patience and their persistence that my walls were put back together, that I began to move into what God had for my life. And different people worked on different parts of the wall. Different people worked on me and built me up and helped me to be what I am today. And I still have people that are still putting pieces of the wall together because I'm not finished. I'm not perfect. The gates aren't all totally up. Everything's not exactly like it's supposed to be, but I can tell you what, I look better now than I looked then because some people were willing. Sorry, I was getting excited. Some people were willing to put in the time, to put in the effort, to do the things that nobody else wanted to do. And they were persistent. That all came about because of love. 1 Corinthians 13:7 says, love never gives up. Love never loses faith. It is always hopeful and it endures through every circumstance. And so, does your love give up? Have you given up on people? Does your love give up? Does it lose faith? Is it always hopeful? Can it endure through every circumstance? My answer is yes, it can. If you're willing to just stay up on the wall. And when distractions come and when people try to call you away and say that's a hopeless case, you can't help that person anymore. You need to come and you need to just be with us. We're doing something different over here. That's the valley or the plain of oh no. And you don't want to go there. Because once God puts on your heart to help somebody, to begin rebuilding the walls in somebody's life, to show them love and compassion, you have to be persistent. There's a part in the story of Nehemiah where it talks about that people were coming to attack them, and it said that they sat on top of the wall and they had a weapon in one hand and they built the wall with the other hand. They were defending by all means necessary what God was doing in Jerusalem. And I'm telling you, we need to defend by all means necessary what God is doing in the lives of those around us. many times we're like Sanballat, and we don't like those walls being rebuilt. We don't want to see other people be built back up because we think they deserve to be exactly where they're at. They got themselves in that mess. They made that pile of charred rocks themselves. Let them build themselves back up. Golly, people, I don't want to be that church. Can I just let you in on something? I really anymore, I don't care if we have 2 people here or if we have 200 people here. Makes me no difference. If we have 2 people here, I'm hoping those 2 people and me can pay the bills. And we'll keep paying the bills as long as those 2 people and myself are rebuilding walls in people's lives. Because I don't want to just be. Nehemiah could have just been. Do you realize he could have just been? Nehemiah could have just been. He could have been the king's cupbearer until he died, either by tasting poisonous wine or by natural causes. Whatever it took, he could have just been that forever, but he chose to be something different. He chose to build a wall. To build a wall. And what I'm challenging you to do is start building walls. Not walls that keep people out, but walls that build people up. We're not building a stone wall, we're building people. We're building disciples. People who follow Christ, who do what Christ did. You want to know what Christ did? He built people. He built up people. When the woman who was caught in adultery was brought to him, he didn't condemn her. He didn't say, look at what you've done. He didn't call her horrible names. He didn't say you have to you go back and spend some time and get your life cleaned up and then come back to me. What he did was he built her up. And after he'd ran off all of her accusers, he said, neither do I accuse you. Go and sin no more. He built her up. He did that for the lame man. He said, your sins are forgiven. Rise up and walk. He did it for Mary as she washed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. He built her up, and he said that she would be talked about as an example of worship forever. He built people up. He took Peter, and after Peter proclaimed him as the Christ, he said, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. He is asking us to build churches, to build people. We've already talked about what a church is. It's people. You want to build a church, you begin building people. Man, I planned on this going way different. But there's about 3 different people you can be in this story. You can be Sanballat and be against all of this, and that's fine. I hope to see you around town. I'm sure you'll be done after this. But my fear is, maybe that's a bad word, not my fear, maybe it's my hope. My hope is that there's somebody in here who finds themselves more in the position of just being a heap of charred stones. You find yourself in this place broken. You find yourself here this morning not knowing that there is a hope. You had trouble singing, there is hope in the promise of the cross, because you don't see hope. You don't see a way out. All you see is a pile of charred rocks. And it may sound weird that I hope that you are in this place, and I hope that you find yourself in that position this morning, but the only reason I hope that is because I know there is hope in the promise of the cross. And I know that there is hope, that there are people here that are like Nehemiah that says, I refuse to leave you this way. I love you the way you are, but I refuse to let you suffer. I refuse to let you stay broken, and I'm going to begin to build you back piece by piece under the power and the anointing of God. I will build you up. I will be persistent. I will not come down. You can call me down, but I'm not coming down, because I am doing a great work in somebody's life through the power of Jesus Christ. John, you sound bold this morning. Well, you know what? I am. Dadgummit, I'm tired. I'm tired of us being wusses. I really am. I'm tired of saying to people, I'll pray for you, and then never doing it. I'm tired of saying, I'll pray for you, and then never taking action in somebody's life. I refuse to see somebody's broken wall and leave it that way. In the story of the Good Samaritan, there were some good church folk that walked by and left that man lying on the road, broken. But there was a Samaritan man that came by, and he refused to leave him that way. I'm ready for action.